In October 2024 I travelled to Cromer, which is on the northern coast of Norfolk in the southeast of England. There I would meet up with my cousin Clive and members of the Ramblers group to which he belongs for a long weekend of walking. I took the train, travelling from York to Peterborough, changing for a train to Norwich and then again for the last leg to Cromer. The next morning we all travelled to Sheringham, which is about 4 and a bit miles to the west along the coast. Sheringham marks the end of the Bittern railway line, which starts at Norwich. It is also the start of the North Norfolk Railway, also known as the Poppy Line, a line largely run by volunteers, which continues as far as Holt, a little over 6 miles to the southwest of Sheringham. The first railway to reach Sheringham arrived in 1887 and followed the route of the Poppy Line. The station was closed in 1967 when the British Rail Station on the other side of the level crossing opened, but was reopened in 1975 as part of the North Norfolk Railway. Anyway, we all trekked down to the coast and then turned left to head along the England coast path. That's the windmill at Weybourne. 5 stories high, built 1850, ceased production in 1916. And so we arrived at Salthouse, which seemed pretty busy. Here you can buy crab sandwiches and visit the Dun Cow pub, which we did. Then we headed back to the coast, taking a path a few hundred metres down the road across Salthouse marshes. Then it started to rain more heavily, and when we reached the coastal path we found ourselves trudging through pebbles. This is really hard work. Thankfully, before too long we reached solid tarmac and took a pebble-free path into Cly next the sea. On the way to the bus stop we passed this cute little car. I wasn't sure whether it was really old or a modern take on 1950s design. I couldn't make out the manufacturer's name, but a photo of the badge reveals it to be a Nissan Figaro. It is actually relatively modern. Only 20,073 were made, all in 1991, and only for the Japanese market, so somebody must have imported it from Japan. There's actually the internals of a Nissan Micra inside. I rather like it. We caught the bus back to Sheringham from a bus stop opposite this delicatessen, which is really excellent and serves tea and coffee as well. I remember visiting here on a previous trip to Norfolk, catching the bus from Wells next the sea. The bus arrived and we all hopped on board. Thanks to a government scheme, we are still only paying £2 for a single ticket, which is a bargain. Glad we caught this when we did, because it started bucketing down shortly afterwards. We arrived in Sheringham without incident and drove back to Cromer. We had an evening meal at the Garden Street Grill, which was very good, although they had run out of the sea bass special. Boo. This time we started the walk where we left off the previous day, at Cly next the sea. Google Maps sent us via an inland route this time, rather than following the coast, and we parked behind the village hall. A short walk down a woody track takes us back to the deli. Then we head west a bit along the road before turning right onto the Norfolk coast path. Cly Windmill is a B&B. You can even get married there if you want. Some other time, perhaps. I had thought this building might be Blakeney Chapel, but Blakeney Chapel was probably not a chapel, is nearer Cly than Blakeney, and has no remains above ground, so probably not. It is the Blakeney Watch House, which was built in 1835 by the Coast Guard and Customs and Excise men. It was used as a lookout post during both World Wars, and was then used by the Girl Guides before being abandoned. It was going to be demolished, but was saved by a fundraising programme that paid for the building's restoration. Nowadays it is a holiday let, but a fairly inaccessible one. Eventually the path loops back inland and you come to Blakeney, which seemed quite busy, despite the wind and the rain. Carrying on along the path we got to Morston, a small village with a quay that seems a bit easier to get to by boat than Blakeney, down Morston Creek. 6 miles of walking, we reached Wells next the sea and visited the Golden Fleece to dry off, have a pint and eat a snack or two. Then it was time to catch the bus back to Cley and drive back to Cromer. That night we ate at the White Horse in Overstrand, just east of Cromer, which was superb. On Monday morning, we all checked out of Cromer Country Club and mostly went our separate ways, leaving just the three of us to go on a short walk starting at Cromer. In fact, we started at the Country Club car park, which is next to Cromer Lighthouse. It is 18 metres tall and sits high on Cromer Ridge. It was built in 1833, electrified in 1958 and automated in 1990. It replaced two earlier lighthouses, both of which fell into the sea due to coastal erosion. When built, the present lighthouse was half a mile from the cliff edge. It is now much closer. Before long we had to head inland to Overstrand. I think the coastal path had crumbled away. We'd passed the pub we ate in the previous evening, and there's also a rather fun mock Tudor building down the road, the Sea Marge Luxury Seaside Hotel. This is a Grade 2 listed Edwardian building, which was built by the financier Sir Otto Speyer, who was deknighted and then deported as a spy. We started heading further inland, joining a footpath that passes underneath this rather well-made bridge. It once carried a railway line between Cromer and North Walsham, run by the Norfolk and Suffolk Joint Railway, with stations at Overstrand, Trimmingham, Mundersley-on-Sea, Paston and Knapton, amongst others. The line opened between North Walsham and Mundersley in 1898 and was extended to Cromer in 1906. The line closed in 1953. It's fairly easy to make out the course of the line on the map. It's a little unclear around Trimmingham and south of Mundersley, but between Old Hall Street and the edge of North Walsham it forms part of the Paston Way. This is St James's Church in South Reps. There has been a church here since at least 1086 when the Domesday Book was compiled, but the present church dates back to the 13th century. Completion of the church was delayed in the mid-14th century by the arrival of the Black Death, and then again in 1381 when the local villagers were slaughtered in a battle with the superior forces of Henry le Despencer, the fighting Bishop of Norwich. However, work was underway again in the early 16th century when the church was completed. Reformation was well underway in 1552 and the church was pillaged on the orders of Edward VI. A long period of neglect followed, and by 1788 the church was in such bad repair that a decision was made to demolish the north and south aisles, and the nave arches were filled in to make new walls. In the late 19th century further restoration was undertaken, and the tower raised to its present height of somewhere between 114 and 130 feet, depending on who you ask. Heading south from South Reps, we crossed a field and followed a minor road round a corner to reach this. This is the Suffield Arms, a pub, and according to a review by J. Rayner in the Growniad, a restaurant. He rather liked it. but on a Monday morning it was very much closed. Never mind, on the opposite side of the road is Gunton railway station, which can take us back to Cromer. There is no village called Gunton. However, Lord Suffield, who was a major investor in the East Norfolk Railway, lived at nearby Gunton Hall, so they built a station just for him. The passing loop that used to be here has been removed, so the northbound platform is unused and the preserved station buildings are privately owned. Back in Cromer, we went to look at the Grade 2 listed pier. There was a jetty here back in 1391. An iron jetty was built in 1822 and was destroyed in a storm 24 years later. This in turn was replaced by a wooden one. This survived until 1897 when a coal boat crashed into it. It wasn't until 1902 that a replacement was built. It is 450 feet long and has an RNLI lifeboat station at the far end. It has been awarded the title Pier of the Year 3 times. Next, my cousin and I are off to Felbrigg Hall. Felbrigg Hall is a stately home and grounds looked after by the National Trust. It's about 3 miles from Cromer. The Felbrigg family lived here from at least the early 11th century until 1442, when the house was sold to John Wyndham. His line died out in 1599 and the house passed to another John Wyndham, a member of the Somerset branch of the family. His son Thomas is responsible for the south front of the house, which was completed by 1624. When Thomas's son died childless in 1665, the house passed to his half-brother William, who started work adding a new west wing in 1675 and also planted thousands of trees. William's son Ash came next. He spent much of his time in London, but added the orangery in a similar style to the west wing. Ash's son William set off on a grand tour, as his father had done, visiting Florence and Rome in 1739. When his father died in 1749, he returned to Felbrigg and employed the architect James Payne to build a new service wing, add a bay window at the northern end of the west wing, and construct a dining room, making room by demolishing a staircase. The great hall in the south wing was redecorated and Gothic bookcases were added to the floor above to house his book collection. William died of TB in 1761 and the house passed to his son William III. He chose politics as a career, was elected MP for Norwich in 1784 and served under William Pitt as Secretary of War. When he died, the house passed to the eldest son of his half-brother, William Lukin, who followed a distinguished career in Nelson's Navy. When he inherited Felbrigg Hall, he had the service quarters remodelled and a new Tudor-style stable block built. His son, William Howe Wyndham, had a great interest in farming, spending large sums on expanding the estate, but also remodelled the Great Hall, adding the stained glass. William Howe Wyndham's son, William Frederick Wyndham, whilst at school in Eton, would visit the railway station with a whistle. He would pretend to be a variety of railway employees, causing great confusion. Later he spent ludicrous sums on one Agnes Willoughby, bringing Felbrigg Hall to the edge of bankruptcy. His uncle, an executor of his father's will, launched a judicial inquiry into his mental health, but after 34 days he was declared sane. He had a son, Frederick, with Agnes Willoughby, but when their marriage failed, William Frederick was left with almost nothing and died in poverty in 1866, aged 26. In 1863, the estate was sold to John Ketton, a Norwich merchant. He is responsible for adding the American garden, which we didn't see. He fell out with his first son John, and the estate was passed on to his second son Robert William on John Sr.'s death in 1872. Robert William Ketton never married, and his two youngest sisters, Marion and Gertrude, kept house for him. Sadly, they died young, and Robert never really recovered, becoming a recluse. The house began to decay, and the farms and woodland were neglected. He was forced to sell off many treasures and furniture to meet the bills. In 1924, he moved out of the house and passed it on to his nephew, Wyndham Cromer, who changed his name to Wyndham Cromer Ketton Cromer. Gradually, Wyndham managed to fix things up in very trying circumstances. He died in 1933, aged 63. His son, Robert Wyndham Ketton Cromer, continued to repair the house and manage the woodland. He was also a scholar of 18th century culture, adding much to the house's library, as well as writing the book Felbrigg, the Story of a House. He was a JP and a High Sheriff of the county, and was involved in the foundation of the University of East Anglia. Electricity was brought to his tenants and then the house in 1954. He bequeathed the house to the National Trust, who took over when he died in 1969. We had some lunch in what used to be the stable block on the eastern side of the big square courtyard. Then you have to exit from the south side of the courtyard, which is the east wing, and turn right, heading to the main entrance on the south front, which is the earliest part of the house, started in 1620 on the site of the previous Tudor building. We entered through the screens passage and turned right into the morning room. In Jacobean times this was a kitchen, but became a parlour in 1809 when the panelling was installed. Then we headed back the way we came and entered the Great Hall. If you glance to the right, you can see into the stair hall. The Great Hall used to be a billiard room, but its appearance today is largely due to the modifications William Howe Wyndham made in 1842, including the stained glass, a few panels of which are medieval and others were taken from St. Peter Mancroft Church in Norwich. From here you enter the west wing, which was built in the 1680s by William Wyndham I and modified further by his grandson William Wyndham II. The first room we come to is the dining room, which had originally been a staircase. The room is hung with portraits of William II's parents and grandparents. The next room is the drawing room, which up until the 1800s had been the main reception and dining room. William Wyndham II used this room to display some of the larger items he brought back from his grand tour, and the grandson of his wife by a previous marriage, Admiral William Lukin Wyndham, added the crimson damask wall hangings and matching upholstery. The northernmost room in the west wing is the cabinet, which was originally the drawing room. The bay window was added in 1751 when William Wyndham II adapted the room to display some of the smaller acquisitions from his grand tour. The room is a rare example of a grand tour collection from the 18th century that is still displayed as the collector intended. From here we walk back south along the stone corridor to reach the stair hall. Here we see this statue, Il Spinario, from the Latin spina, meaning thorn, also known as boy pulling a thorn out of his foot. It is a 19th century copy of a bronze which is still in the Palazzo dei Conservatori in Rome. Up the stairs is the library, added by William Wyndham II in 1752, just after the Cabinet. In 1924 this room was in a very sad state, and Payne's neo-Jacobean ceiling was replaced with a plain flat one. However, in 1999 fragments of the original ceiling were discovered above the blocked up West Bay window. This had been blocked up by William Wyndham III to make room for more bookshelves. The ceiling was recreated in the original style by Stevensons of Norwich using traditional methods and materials. This thing is in William Wyndham II's dressing room, although it cannot be his since it is Victorian. It's a metal slipper bath. Apparently slipper baths are still around, they just have the bath rim at one end higher than the other, making it easier to sit up in them, and it makes them look like a slipper, it says here. This one looks more like a boot. Now we start heading north along the west wing. First comes the yellow bedroom, adjacent to the dressing room. Note the door that leads out onto the corridor, disguised to look like the wall. Next is the rose bedroom. The rose chintz used on the bed hangings and sofa were introduced around 1840. In 2004 the fabric was so faded that it was replaced with a newly printed copy using an unfaded section of material from a curtain as a guide. This is the red bedroom. The striped wallpaper was pasted up around 1860 and has faded over the years. The lighter buff stripes used to be pink. And finally the Chinese bedroom. The Chinese wallpaper was an import supplied by the architect James Payne in 1751. It cost William Wyndham II a pretty penny to have it hung by one John Scruton, which he described as a cursed deal. Then we went back downstairs using the back stairs, which reused the balusters taken from the 1680 Great Stairs, which were demolished in 1751. This leads to the bird corridor, which was added by Admiral Wyndham in 1831 to ensure that meals leaving the kitchen would remain warm on their journey to the dining room. And this is the kitchen, which lies on the western side of the courtyard. It has two long oak tables, one of which is Victorian, but the other is 18th century. The Aga at the far end of the room was added by the last squire at Felbrigg. I can't quite remember how we got out. I think we backtracked a bit and then headed down the south corridor, i.e. south of the courtyard, passing the servants' hall, the steward's room and the tenant's waiting room, which leads to the gun room, the knife room and the strong room. I was expecting a gift shop at this point, but they seem to have missed a trick here, allowing visitors to wander away without tempting them. There is a second-hand bookshop and various other small shops in the northern half of the courtyard, but you aren't forced to visit them. So we took a look at the walled garden instead, whose earliest surviving feature is the dovecote of 1753. This was on the point of crumbling away before the last squire rescued it in 1937. We had to leave since they were closing shortly, and I had to get a train to Norwich. But there's loads more to see. St Margaret's Church is certainly worth a look, or go for a walk around the extensive estate. Well, I caught the train to Norwich and eventually checked in to the Premier Inn. Not the Duke Street city centre one, which is better, but the Nelson city centre one, which is handy since it is just across the river from the station, although it's not exactly easy to find the entrance. Long queue at check-in, but got there in the end. Got a meal deal. Evening meal was adequate. After breakfast the following morning I had some time to kill before my train arrived, so I went for a wander. And that's about it. Train to Grantham, train to York. The latter delayed by 45 minutes, so I missed my connection at York, putting me back by about 3 hours.